Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CDL podcast channel. In this episode of the podcast today, we've got a little more excitement because Kyle and I asked for more news, and we kind of received. We got a lot of spicy talk this week with Crim being on the flank and kind of his debate that ended up not being as heated as we thought it might be with the GM of the LA Gorillas, and then Slasher came on the flank, kind of spilled a lot of his thoughts on the past season with 100T and LA Thieves, as well as some stuff that kind of really made his year a tough one for him. We had some retirements with Aqua. We had some rumors with the new Washington roster. Everyone's making a top 30 list. We're going to talk about all that stuff, as well as kind of some ideas Kyle and I might have to potentially improve the CDL format, see if they'll hire us and take our ideas. Before we get into any of the news and questions we have for the week, Kyle, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. We have, like you mentioned, a lot of good, good news topics on the slate today. I feel like we could easily, spend, you know, a good chunk of the podcast just going over, those topics and kind of opening up some of those, uh, what the can of worms would be with those, and just like I think they spark a lot of bigger discussion. And obviously, improving the CDL format is one of my uh, has been one of my big desires to talk about. So I'm excited to record today.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a fun one, especially because this is the first podcast we've come into in, I mean, at least a month, and been excited for the news that we have instead of the topic that we're gonna discuss more. Like, there's some good news this week, but before we get into news, I want to give a shout out to the audio platforms. If everybody could go drop a follow on those and start listening on those, we're trying to kind of get the analytics up and get the playtime up on the audio platforms. We've seen a pretty big jump in listening on there, which is awesome to see. And we're trying to keep growing that. So if you guys are listening on audio platform and can drop a follow, we also post polls in there for kind of like a weekly question for a debate topic. So if we start getting some more votes on those, we can maybe discuss them in the following pod after it's posted. But I think we can get right into the topics. We're going to start out with actually a Reddit topic that I saw this week. Actually, was just scrolling through Reddit a little bit. I was looking if there was some interesting discussion going on in there. I didn't see a ton of like unusual stuff, kind of stuff you normally see in the daily discussion thread. But then I saw somebody, Slayerado, there's a user, just COD competitive fan, it says here. He listed a question up for discussion that said, could a Black Ops 3 or Black Ops 4-esque game with specialists and operators and pick and ban work for comp? Said he just had this idea thinking about the BO3 ban and protect system. Seems like a cool concept, sort of like Valorant, but with League of Legends pick and ban system in a COD game. That's something that I thought was super interesting. I know Kyle and I talked about it a little bit before the podcast, and he's not as familiar with the Black Ops 3 and 4 style games. It's a little before his timeline into competitive COD, but I thought this was something that's a little interesting. I don't think it'll ever happen, but I think it's something that like we could look at with a thing like League of Legends, which is obviously super successful, way bigger than COD, and even Valorant, which is blowing up right now. And they have like heroes, which is what we had in Black Ops 4 with the specialists like Grav Slam, Tempest. I think it'd be somewhat interesting if we had like mini specialists in the game, just like with slight abilities, like nothing crazy like a grapple and all that, but like one of them had like the sticky nade that they could use that would cluster, and just like random little things that were little abilities and they could ban and protect them, just to add a little bit of variety into the game. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be kind of interesting. Like I'll kind of ask you the question. Like, what was the competitive like chatter when stuff like the Tempest and Grav Slam and like stuff like that was when those were in the game? Like, was there a big contingent of, you know, active players calling for those to be GA'd or taken out, or
So
can you shine some light on that?
it basically was almost, at least in my from my point of view, it was almost like a split. Like the fans and the players were almost against each other, but players also recognized that specialists were fun and they were entertaining and they made for highlight plays. Like they created memes as well. On the LG team in BO4, Slacked was the guy that used the Grav Slam, and he was like famously known for the first like few months of the game for being like so historically bad with it. Like he couldn't get a kill with it, even though it was like the best specialist. and they called it like the chat would spam Slack Slam when somebody had a terrible graph slam. Like it became a meme. And then all of a sudden, like a big moment when LG, like I believe it was a tournament they won, or maybe it was just during a league match, but he just like ran out of showers on gridlock, slammed, popped a 5-piece with it, got the entire team, and then like it became like a whole meme that like he turned it around. It wasn't a Slack Slam anymore, and then people started making fun of Tej for being horrible at it. And then like at one event, they made it a thing where like if you got a 3-piece with it, everybody got free tacos, and like it just became like a cool like thing for the fans. And like so many of the highlights from Black Ops 4 and even Black Ops 3, not as much Black Ops 3 because the specialists were actually better in Black Ops 4, but like so many of the highlights from the first tournament are Dashy with the Tempest, and then there's a lot of slam plays. Like Karma had an insane slam play when he was using the grapple Maddox for Optic, and like there's just a ton of situations where like huge highlight reels came from a person like going crazy with their specialists. And like from a fan perspective, it's so entertaining. I get from the player perspective, it's a little fluky and maybe like creates kind of like non-competitive scenarios, but I think if you made the specialists a little less OP but still allowed them to have like exciting plays, it would make the league so much more entertaining. And that's I get where the players are coming from, but like it just made everything so entertaining that like you think a guy could be back against a wall, but then Dashy could pull out the Tempest and pop a 5-piece and like get you back in the game. It was just something that just added that extra element of like you're never out of the game, which as a fan makes it more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, some of the VODs I've watched back from like Black Ops 3, some of those like you see players like pulling out like the scythe and stuff like that. Like were those that was kind of along the same line?
Yeah,
Of,
those are basically the same thing as like the Tempest and everything, but like the
yeah.
Scythe wasn't as good, and the Tempest wasn't as good in Black Ops 3. They were definitely still good. The one that was just OP in Black Ops 3 that would have been G8 like instantly if the game was still played was Active Camo. You literally went invisible, and like there's like Heat Wave, which just basically like stunned you so you couldn't see your move. Like those would be banned if it was today, but like a crazy play with like the weapons just was like just so cool to me.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see like obviously they'd have to be built into the game and they'd have to be relatively balanced. But I don't think it's impossible that we would ever, that we would never see these things again.
And if they're little ones like in Black Ops 3, you had like glitch, where you just like teleport back in time to like a spot that you were 10 seconds earlier. Like nothing that'll make you pop like a 5-piece. I think just adding that little wrinkle into the game, or like there was one called Psychosis where you just like pop your specialist in Black Ops 3 and it would just put 3 little clones of you that would just run in a straight line. So you could tell they were the fake ones, but like you could maybe bait somebody into shooting to like give up their position. Just like little things like that each team could ban 2 specialists so the other team couldn't pick it, and then you could just have like a little like just a little bit of a strategy war before the game. Like, Dashy's really good with this, if you could ban him from it, or Crim's really good with this, you can ban him from that, and like force them to like put together a new meta. It'd just be something I think that would add an extra wrinkle, and I'm all for more strategy. It's obviously something that probably won't happen, but I just thought it was a really interesting question to discuss and kind of get us warmed up to talk about the news.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, it's all for at the end of the day, like we have to kind of we have to balance what's competitive with what uh plays well on the screen. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing a quad feed in the on the kill cam and stuff, but I don't know. I mean, it would just have to be it'd have to be kind of like a perfect storm of
Yeah.
what happens. So
Yeah, we've definitely got to balance the competitive product, but at the end of the day, I mean, the viewers are kind of what drives the league, and if we can get a big uptick in viewers from just a little bit of excitement that keeps the game competitive, I mean, I'm all for it. But getting into the news, we're gonna start off hot right away. We're gonna start out with a guy that always makes headlines, and they're usually always funny, Mr. Crimsix. He kind of went on a little bit of a rampage this whole week, pretty much on Twitter since our last podcast. He called out about a quarter of the league right away for paying the minimum, then kind of walked that back a little bit on the flank when they actually talked about it. Like when he was just not tweeting, he kind of talked about how it was really only one team, and Methods mentioned, yeah, it's like one team and another team that's paying very close to the minimum. Not sure who that other team is, but I think we all know the one team paying only the minimum is Paris. They didn't really want to say it, understandably, because they're all involved with the league. They probably don't want to get fined, but we can say it. We're not involved with the league. We know it's Paris paying the minimum and really doing nothing to help the league. Kind of the first thing we want to talk about was what is this like with a team paying the minimum, not willing to do content. Certain other teams paying close to the minimum, not really willing to do much in terms of content. What does that do for the sustainability of the league going forward?
Yeah, my thought, from that, I think Krim was actually really well spoken on this. Maybe he got a little bit excited with calling, appearing to call out, a quarter of the league.
Yeah.
But I think his underlying point of, uh, you know, once if that becomes like the status quo where if you're not going to accept a minimum contract, okay, F it, we're going to go get another guy that will. um
Hmm.
Kind of like it devalues the players and the brands that they bring to a team. And then that also opens up the door for these players to go off and play Warzone or play something else where to stream. So, I think we all know, like, obviously, like, the Twitch revenues were leaked a few weeks ago. We saw
Yeah.
how much some of these big streamers are making, um, just in a calendar year. Uh, like, ex-coach and great player TP's making like over $1 million.
Yeah.
That's far, far above the league minimum. So just kind of it's a big can of worms, but I think it's worth diving into.
Yeah, if you're one of those players that's like a guy like Methods, who's kind of on the fringe of the league, not 100% sure if he's going to get a roster spot, certainly is good enough to still compete at the highest level, but now has like 9,000 subscribers on his stream and is a very, very good Call of Duty player. Obviously, that if he transitioned and wanted to play Warzone, he would probably pretty quickly get to the top of the tournaments and place well in tournaments and potentially win some more money. And you see the Twitch revenues, like you said, and how much people are making. There's really more money to be made unless you're like on Faze from last year and you're winning every tournament to get all that prize money. There's really more money to be made in streaming. So if people are just consistently offering you the minimum, unless you're a player trying to break into the league, like Methods can make probably 4 times that in just a couple months than his minimum salary would be if he wanted to play for Paris. Like pretty soon, Paris is just going to be the team that only like 4 challengers players that are really just looking to get their shot in the league sign with. It's scary for the league. That's why I agreed with Krim. Um, it's very scary for the league going forward if teams are only willing to pay the minimum because of the fact that the option of Warzone and streaming is so readily available for a lot of these players because their personalities, especially the older ones, they've been building this personality within this community for so many years that they're going to be just fine if they flip to a stream right away, especially with gifted subs and everything on Twitch. Like it's a scary, scary, just kind of time, I guess, for the league with teams doing this. Hopefully, Paris sells their spot and gets a more competitive team in here, or we see expansion, get more teams that want to be in. But it's scary, I would say for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you can kind of draw a parallel to almost to like professional sports where obviously like if you take a sport like baseball, you have like uber rich teams like the Yankees, the Dodgers, and then you have like the lower revenue teams that they can only, their roster might only be like a fraction of what the upper ones are. But then once if they have one or two good players, they're not going to be able to keep them for long before they get bought out. I don't
Hmm.
necessarily think that correlates to the CDL at this point, since we only have 12 teams and 48 players. Um, you know, Everybody pretty much knows who the really good players are, but maybe maybe a guy like Standy, for example, like maybe they signed him on a minimum-ish value, and then when it comes time for him to re-up, he could get offered 6 figures easily. Um,
Yeah.
and whether it could be like who's gonna pay the most, and like if he has a good agent that's looking out for his best interests, he's gonna be like, hey, like Dallas or the Chicago spot or whoever, they're offering you like 500K, and I don't know, that's just is some. But then you draw that back to um, you know, Krim's thought of like if teams are only willing to pay the minimum and nothing more, then that kind of just like devalues that franchise spot, and it devalues the competitiveness of the league. you're not getting the best talent, because the best talent is going to go stream and play Warzone, or play Valorant or do something.
And kind of speaking, towards that, that's obviously 100% true. And also, like the kind of other piece we talked on, also getting into our next little piece that we had under the Crim flank with the Hecz soliciting collaboration from other orgs. He was trying to, apparently that's what they said in the flank, he was trying to collab with other organizations to do content, and half of them didn't respond, or a bunch of them didn't respond, and just didn't even like give him the time of day. And he's like, Hecz doesn't need the viewers from the Paris Legion, all two of them, to help the Optic Chicago spot get more fans and more viewers. They need him to potentially become more popular. And like, for Paris, it's kind of an anomaly because I just genuinely think they don't care about growing and they just don't care about their spot. But for other teams that maybe aren't doing a ton of content, maybe a team like Florida or London, who are pretty good on Twitter, but maybe aren't posting a ton of YouTube content. I mean, you've got teams like Toronto and Minnesota who are posting pretty good content, even like Dallas, who has a pretty popular brand because they win so much in Envy, but they don't have a ton of views in their content. If there's teams like LA Thieves and Optic, the two teams that just get boatloads of views, like if they're offering to do collaborations with you, you got to do it. And like they don't realize like teams like Optic and Thieves are always going to be popular with Hecz and Nadeshot heading it up, but like teams like Minnesota and New York, who are kind of posting a ton of content and really using a guy like Zuma to forward them, and the Rocker really making a lot of content and having Midnight kind of back that up and make good content for them. They don't realize how much it's going to impact them. Let's say the CDL does make it 20 plus years, and these teams are super popular. Like you said with baseball, that's going to start impacting things here if we make it 10, 15 plus years, where Rocker and Subliners have a huge following. Their content has a ton of followers, and they're making a lot of money off of it. They're considered a bigger org. They can pay more money to their players, and they're willing to fill out more of the salary cap. That's going to make a big difference, and some of these teams are really going to regret not making content, in my opinion, if we end up blowing up like we hope the league does to maybe 20 plus teams and stuff. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole like I thought the whole reason why they had to choose geographical locations and um, do all this was to kind of build a grassroots like support from their like locality. And unfortunately, with Chicago, it didn't really work out for Optic, as we have like that rumored Dallas merger. That's for various other reasons though. But I feel like teams like New York and Minnesota have really kind of gone on with that. And then obviously 100 Thieves being headquartered in LA, they actually have a brick and mortar like headquarters there, for the
Yeah.
the Thieves and stuff. But and then obviously Faze is Faze, like um I think they're kind of all scattered around like the southeast, Texas area, Atlanta, obviously. But obviously they're a giant org as well. But a lot of these other teams, maybe they were banking on having a LAN, and then but who knows what they were going to do after that? Like oh, in Toronto's another team that's really been doing good with like the whole uh content and like kind of
Yeah.
growing from there. I don't want to forget about them. But yeah, obviously if a guy like Hector comes knocking, you should you should be asking him what you can do for him, instead of like, how can
Yeah.
he help me? Like,
He needs no help
um,
from anybody besides maybe LA Thieves to get in new viewers. Maybe the only team that could offer him new viewers.
right. And I mean, yeah, like I feel like, one of the big steps with growing a brand is definitely doing content, like video content, podcasts. Even if they're like, how cool it would have been if like, you had the Optic guys playing like paintball against the
Yeah.
Mutineers or something, like just like that would be like a million plus views in like,
Yeah.
without a doubt. Like, just it doesn't even have to be Call of Duty related. It could be like we go bowling, or
Yeah. And
we
then all of a
yeah.
sudden, one person's personality, they do it with Florida, and Sky's personality shines out. Like, oh, he's a really cool dude. A bunch of Sky's fans come from that video, and then he's really popular. That makes Florida popular. Like, it's so simple. Like, it almost seems too simple to be true, but it's like either they don't get it or they don't care enough to want to get it. Like, it's absurd to me.
Right. And I mean, one last thing I have to say on that is like maybe a lot of teams are like using like they're like, oh, like we're still, you know, pandemic, whatever. But I just hope that a lot of those attitudes will start to change and teams will realize that we kind of have to balance the whole reality of the current world with this is a business and we do have like obligations to meet to be able to pay our players to be able to run our org. A lot of these teams are backed by investors who want some kind of return on their money. So uh yeah, I just hope that more teams will be self sufficient, I guess, and you don't have to wait for Hecz to come begging you to make content.
Yeah, I agree. We can move on to the next little part of the Crim flank. Moral of the story for the content piece, though, Kyle and I will come be the official podcast of any franchise. We'll sell out for any of you. We'll be the official podcast of the Paris Legion if we have to. That'd be an awesome gig. I don't know what we'd have to talk about because they're probably not going to have a roster until the day before the season, but we'll sell out for any of you franchises. Come hit us up. But the other thing we want to talk about under the Crim flank was a little bit of the LAG general manager. Alex Rubens was on the flank with Crim. I was really impressed with him. Obviously, haven't really heard much about him, don't know much about him because he isn't like a super involved person in the Call of Duty scene before the CDL. But it was really interesting to hear him talk. He kind of gave that perspective that we always ask for. Like, what goes through an org's head when they're signing players? Like, why did they sign these certain players? LAG was a mess these last 2 years. We thought they weren't really trying to be competitive. He kind of shined a new light as to what really happened with their roster construction over the past 2 years, which is really interesting for me to hear because like we always assume like LAG didn't care, but from the sounds of it, they were paying their players a lot. It's just they couldn't get the right roster, so they were going with what they thought was the best option. Is basically what I took from it. Like he said that first year, apparently LAG was one of the last teams into the league, which obviously we don't really know the order they came in, but apparently the Gorillas were one of the last teams into the league, and a lot of the rosters were basically solidified, so they didn't have much to pick from. And Alex came into the mix pretty late, didn't have much time, and he was basically presented with a couple different options. And Aches came to him with his team and his vision and stuff with Bevels and Ricky, who are still the coaches. And I guess that's the vision he liked the best. He said the other options, even in hindsight, he says the other options weren't any better. So that says a lot because that LAG team year one was bad. And then they basically get rid of the whole roster. They have Vivid going into the second year, and he said they really were looking to put players around Vivid, but a lot of people wanted to be teams of four, and they had a lot of established stuff, and they weren't really willing to get rid of Vivid since he was like the one bright spot of their first year, and they thought they could build around him. So nobody wanted to come in groups of three. The one group that wanted to come in a group of three was that former EG squad minus Aches. So that was kind of their best option once again. And they said they've been paying even their substitutes. They had a full substitute challengers team. They were paying them over the league minimum. Like they're certainly shelling out the money. It's not like they're being cheap. It's just like they didn't have the best roster options. Then finally this year, everybody's a free agent. And look, they signed a very good roster that we think could compete for championships this year. So I thought he was very well spoken and provided a pretty interesting insight into kind of how teams work. And maybe everything isn't as we kind of see it from the outside. There could be so much more, which we knew, but it was interesting to hear him talk about how this, like, it wasn't intentional that LAG just sucked and they were just trying to ride on the CDL's coattails, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate how candid he was in his being open with just kind of the inner workings of uh that org over at LAG. Yeah, I I guess I was anticipating that they were paying their guys a decent amount of money, and uh even that underperforming squad of Assault, Silly, and Apathy, along with Vivid to start. They were. I mean, we don't know the specifics, but they were making above the league minimum, and Crim was even impressed with how much they were making. So that
Yeah.
must be saying a lot. Um, but yeah, like you said, really well spoken as well. I think he was working with the same like executives, but he was working like actually for the LA Rams, I believe.
Yeah.
And then they asked him to come in kind of at the last minute to kind of head up the Gorillas org from a GM standpoint. So I mean I think he's done a good job, and obviously this year kind of like we said this should be their best year to compete. I don't know if they could have signed a much better roster, to be honest, with who was already taken, and I mean, unless they honestly found another diamond in the rough AM player, I think this will be their best chance to compete for being a top tier team.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Another thing he kind of mentioned was, or like Krim alluded to, he didn't actually mention it because obviously this is something he can't really talk about, but there's like kind of the hint, and you can't tell how trolly it was, that maybe Methods was the preferred choice over Krim for a possible AR spot until they finally were able to kind of get a hold of Slasher and make him the main AR, which is the clear choice. But that was something interesting, kind of maybe seeing a team prioritize a player's popularity, although Krim is very popular, but doesn't create a ton of content, where Methods obviously had blown up his stream in the time that he was a substitute. And then another thing that we don't have to talk a ton about, but he mentioned that Krim mentioned that the Vivid acquisition was a ton of money for Dallas. He actually isn't. He said it wasn't 100% sure, but he thinks that it was more than what 100 Thieves acquired Hook for, which is insane to think about because Hook was coming off a world championship, being one of the best players, and is always viewed as one of the most talented players in COD history. And Vivid's a good player, but Hook has like a different ring to his name. When you hear his name, a lot of people think MVP, one of the most talented players of all time. And Vivid is viewed as a very good player, but he's not like an MVP, most talented player of all time. So it's interesting to hear that they potentially paid more for Vivid than Thieves had to for Hook. Obviously not confirmed, but pretty interesting to hear, I guess.
Yeah, wasn't Clay's name brought into that as well?
Yeah, they said that who was it? Somebody, Paul X. I think they said Paul X's buyout was more
Oh,
expensive
right,
than
right,
Clay,
right.
which I mean, Paul X, great talent, great player, but I mean, we all know he shouldn't be more expensive to buy out than Clayster, like 3-time
Yeah.
world champ. Like that was absurd to hear that. Like some people just have just a completely backwards view on the value of players.
Yeah, I mean, again, my 79th plea for some specifics into contracts and buyouts would be greatly appreciated. I think for the amount of drama it would cause, it would also alleviate a lot of the speculation and rumors that kind of run wild on Twitter and Reddit and stuff like that. With just like who has a buyout contract or a buyout clause, and where do these guys stand? I don't need to know like how much Slasher is making or whatever, but just some kind of general info would be appreciated.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree 100%. We've definitely come to the conclusion over the podcast, though, that we're on the complete same side of that one. But speaking of money as well, the last little thing before we move on to Slasher on the flank is we're going into the third year of franchising. Kind of maybe like they also mentioned this is maybe like the first real year of the CDL. Obviously, we all know we've all been going through it for a long time. Year one was cut short pretty early. By a global pandemic. And then year two was pretty much all chalk to online, except for a little bit of the end of the year. But we're finally, hopefully, fingers crossed, uh, going to get a full year of LAN and fans at tournaments and a full year of how the CDL is supposed to look, whatever that means, but how it was supposed to look with full venues and people paying for tickets and live events, kind of like a traveling circus with the CDL. So I'm excited for that. We don't really have to talk too much about it, but I'm just expecting big things from the CDL. I believe it's kind of a do or die. I mean, if it kind of flops this year with fully in-person events, as long as we have that, it's going to be looking rough for the future, especially going into a game next year that is looking to maybe be a Modern Warfare Part 2, which don't have high hopes for. So if the year flops this year, we could be looking for another flop, and it's going to be looking rough. So it's a big year for the CDL. There's some pressure on them.
Yeah, I have a few things just to highlight on that. Like obviously, a lot of the state of affairs, those are ever changing, and you know, I feel like at some point people just kind of have to learn to live with the way the world is, and uh, you saw the CDL being pretty cautious with you know, maybe they could have gotten back to LAN and Cold War earlier than they did, but obviously we're glad that they did. It provided, one of the greatest events we've ever seen with the Stage 5 major, and then obviously Champs was Champs. Um and then we I guess we it kind of goes into what the format will be, and we'll kind of give our hypothesis on what we'd like to see later. But will we see just a slew of lands, or will it be a kind of a hybrid? Some online, some land. And obviously, we'd like to see full lands, but that might not be feasible. And where do you balance how many matches you see with how many lands? Because obviously, like getting everyone out to a location is one thing, and then it takes a lot of money and time and manpower to set those up. So yeah, just a lot of things. And I'm hoping that we'll see the league in full force this year, obviously. But yeah, just I wouldn't necessarily say it's a make or break year, but I feel like every year that they don't capitalize on growing the fan base, they're kind of just like stagnating with who they have. And then we've seen so many retirements, and the league just thinning out, and challengers is kind of stagnating as well. um so I mean, it is kind of getting to that pressing issue with we kind of got to step this up a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. We do. It's gonna be a make or break year. I'm a little worried, but I believe they can get it done. They're gonna potentially have the retirement of Scump coming up at the end of the year too. So they've really got to bank on maybe really milking him to drive viewership as much as they can and get as many fans in before he potentially leaves. But moving on to another episode of The Flank, which is our other big piece of news. Slasher was on there, kind of talking about the whole situation with 100 Thieves last year, LA Thieves, how things went down. Obviously, a messy year for them. We know it was a messy year. He confirmed that it was a messy year. I mean, just looking from the outside in, seeing that many roster changes, something was going on that wasn't right. With this one, we can maybe there's a little bit less to talk about here, maybe, so we can go through it a little quicker than we did with Crim on The Flank. But he starts out, kind of talks about his past year, how he struggled through some stuff. He got benched pretty quickly after his grandfather passed away. And then I think he said a couple weeks later, he got a call from his mom that she was diagnosed with cancer. Obviously, a super, super tough time for him. I think he did say, though, that his mom's cancer is at least in remission and stuff, and she's doing a lot better. So that's awesome to hear. Obviously, glad to hear that. And he said, yeah, he was going through a really tough time during the season, was sleep schedule absolutely chalk, sleeping basically the whole day, waking up at 8 p.m. And he was really thankful for Lamar. Accuracy was his roommate at the time, kind of checking in on him, keeping him up, which is also good to hear. Another God player supported another one, which we always like to hear the good stories of the scene. But a super tough time for Slasher. And to be honest, every time he played pretty damn well for everything he was going through. I'm sure he had a lot on his mind. Obviously, anybody is going to have a lot on their mind when they have a family member, especially a parent, going through something like that and going through a loss. A lot on his mind. And during the pandemic, he couldn't travel as much to see her. So had to be pretty unbearable to play through. And then you have to go through your first real benching of your career. So it was just another like crazy situation where it's like we didn't know what was going on. Slasher keeps everything so private. They were saying maybe he benched himself, and it's like that's like one reason why with stuff like this you just don't always want to speculate, because nobody could have speculated what was going on and how tough it was. And it always seemed like a guy like Slasher would never bench himself, which is something I mentioned when he got benched. I was like, there's no way this dude benched himself. He's too competitive. And it sounds like he didn't bench himself. He didn't want to be benched. But the fact that he was able to play through a lot of this for a majority of the year and play so well, it's just a testament to how strong of a mental fortitude he has. And I'm glad everything seems to be doing better with his mom and his family now. But sounded like he was really excited to get back out there and compete this year, and has some things to prove because he didn't like the way the organization handled last year.
Yeah, I really kind of appreciated where he's like, everything that I do, on Twitter and you know, on on the game and everything, that's like Slasher. But then like there's this whole like reserved Austin Litico that's like, he doesn't like to. I get, understandably, he's a very private person. I don't think it's incumbent on people to be fully disclosing everything that's going on in their
No.
life. People are entitled to their own privacy, I definitely
Yeah.
think. But yeah, just obviously great to hear that he things are looking up for him, and he obviously he's on a team that he wants to be on now. and his mother's doing okay, but obviously you could hear him getting choked up a little bit on
Yeah.
the flank too. That was kind of some raw emotion, and yeah, I don't think we hear enough of that in the scene, to be honest. But obviously it's got to be genuine and authentic. But yeah, I mean, just to come back and grind like he did, and he obviously, Thanos on land. I think that's
Yeah.
been reiterated a lot. Um, obviously he came back and played unreal. And he was even critical of, like, he's like, oh man, my control could have been so much better. Like, but he was frying in hard point and everything. Um, and kind of knowing that Octane was coming back to 100 Thieves, and he kind of was talking about how he was trying to package himself up as with Envoy maybe, or to kind of stay on Thieves, but he kind of saw the writing was on the wall. So yeah, just obviously he's a you know staple player in the COD scene, and I don't know. I don't really want to rag too much on 100 Thieves for how they managed it. I think Slasher being benched was like one of their 10 roster moves, and
Yeah.
with Hook, Venom, TJ, all those people being juggled in and out of the roster. Just it wasn't a really ideal situation for anybody, to be honest. And Slasher just happened to be one of those roster moves that he was benched, and he didn't even play the game. And he you know they're talking about how eights aren't really a thing anymore, nobody's playing eights, and uh
Hmm.
he's kind of mind blown why that doesn't happen. And uh I don't know, just a lot of he's a really good podcast guest. I think
So well
he
spoken.
yeah, he offers a lot of, well, that's because he has a college degree.
Yeah. One of the
um
only COD pros.
right. But yeah, just always you know a 2-hour flank episode, but it's so easy listening. And but yeah, just a lot of things. And
Yeah. He's always been one of my favorite players. I've said it forever, and this definitely made me like him even more. Maybe move him up my list. Just the amount of respect I gained from him, especially like on top of obviously all the family stuff we mentioned, how much that had to be weighing on his mental with getting benched and everything. Then he talked about how he knew like 8 months ago Octane to 100 T was a done deal. So he basically knew that like after the season he was a free agent. He didn't know his job security was looking like because he knew he was off 100 Thieves. Like that's also something that weighs on your mind whenever like you might not have a job next year and somebody's taking your spot pretty much guaranteed. Like the only way he probably could have saved a spot is if he was like champs MVP and they won it. Like that was maybe the only way he could save a spot. And even then it might not be enough because Octane to 100T seemed like such a done deal. So on top of everything he was going through mentally, that probably added another aspect that was really tough to deal with and made the year harder. Just gained a huge amount of respect. I already had it for him, but this just confirmed that the respect was actually earned and not something false. The only other thing I want to talk about, because we've talked enough about the mental aspect for him in 100T. Like, I agree with you. I don't really want to rag on 100T. I think it was a tough situation. They came in kind of late into the year this year, didn't know if they were going to have their spot, kind of had to scrap together their roster. But the other thing I thought that was interesting to talk about a little bit of the past was going into MW, kind of the stuff he mentioned about that OGLA roster that he was a part of going into the year. It sounded like Dashy kind of agreed that, this is what we're going to do with the roster. Slash is going to be the AR. I'm going to be the flex, run a second AR if I can, but going to have to run a sub in some situations if that might come up. And then immediately after signing the contract, he was like, no, I want to go to Huntsman. And they were like, you wanted to play with us, which I can see how that would make the situation bad when you have a guy saying he doesn't want to play with you before you've even played your first match. That makes some awkward tension on a team. And they tried to trade him for Gunless. It didn't work out. That's what they were trying to work. And I think that would actually made maybe both teams pretty interesting. I think that could have helped OGLA out a ton and helped Gunless out a ton, giving him a more natural role. But the more interesting thing I wanted to talk about, if you don't have anything to say on that one, was their MW targets. If you want to mention those going into the year instead of Dashy and JCap, who they were potentially looking at.
yeah, so it was brought up in obviously in the same episode of the flank that they were potentially looking at Pharaoh and Mac. Obviously Mac went on to be on the subliners. Pharaoh, came into the Mutineers squad and was obviously a game changer on that squad. Late great Pharaoh, R.I.P. But yeah, being obviously they would have taken Dashy and JCap's spot, so like where they would have filled in, Pharaoh. I think he played in the 5v5. He played a flex kind of, or he really ran everything, and Mac was kind of along the same lines. So you would have had Slasher on main, and then Mac and Pharaoh running whatever, and then you would have had PJ on sub, and then Kenny on sub as well. Yeah, I mean that's a really good roster.
It would have been a great roster.
I mean, just kind of seeing where everything wound up for those two players, and thinking of how Slasher could have provided some leadership, and obviously we don't really know what the whole. I mean, there's been a lot that's been said about like how that OGLA squad was run, and like I think they had a. Oh God, who was the GM of that squad?
Mud Dog.
Mud Dog. Okay, didn't they have who was the guy that used to host the podcast with Nameless?
Pac-Man.
Wasn't Pac-Man involved in that squad?
He was their coach to start the year and got
that's
fired
right.
mid-season.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. But I mean, just like I don't know, I don't. But just thinking of how that squad was, I don't know. It would have been interesting to see. Obviously we didn't get to see it. But
one thing I'll say about that squad, if anybody that listens to this podcast decently, Kyle, all too well, I'm probably too obsessed with it, but I love playmakers. I love guys that take routes. That's the play style I have when I play. And oh my God, this team would have been taking routes. You've got Slasher to hold things down. Pharaoh, that dude is one of the best playmakers we've ever seen. That's why he was one of my favorite players. Obviously, when he was still playing, he was just the route man. He would make every play out of an impossible situation. Mac kind of does the same thing. He makes some weird plays. Then you got a guy like Kenny, his finesse ability to make plays, and then TJ would just headbutt you in the front. Like that team would have had the playmaking. But one other thing I wanted to mention for my BO4 guys out there, I know you aren't as much of a BO4 guy, but that's my game. Like that was the game I loved, like one of my favorite games. And they mentioned something about their roster in BO4 that they were actually like Slasher had to finesse his way to keep Kenny on the team. They almost dropped Kenny instead of Pharaoh in Black Ops 4. I know Pharaoh and Slasher just did not get along at all in Black Ops 4. They're kind of our two very stubborn personalities at the time, and they just kind of butted heads. And Slasher's stock was higher at the time because he was playing really well, and Kenny and Pharaoh were both struggling to start the year on 100T. And Slasher obviously was the longer tenured player, so I think they kind of went with him, especially with his stats being better than Pharaoh's at the time. And then it was between Pharaoh and Kenny, and apparently everybody wanted to drop Kenny, even though he was coming off his crazy World War II year, and Slasher was like, no, I think Kenny has more potential, so he wanted to drop Pharaoh, and he basically had to get Octane and finesse Octane to get on his side and get on the side of Kenny, so that way they could keep him. And then they wanted Slasher and Octane came over, obviously convinced him to get Kenny. The rest is history, and obviously keeping Kenny was a great decision because they won so many events, but crazy to think about the implications that could have for the league. Kenny could have been off that team. Pharaoh would have never hit Florida in one of those events. Like, who knows where Kenny would be now? What team would he be the franchise player for? Like, just crazy to think some of the implications that that could have had.
Yeah, wasn't that also based around Kenny changing guns that he was using? Like
Yeah,
he was using a SOG, or
he was using the SOG, and
then he went to the Maddox.
Yeah, and to start the year, the SOG was actually like a pea shooter. Like you couldn't get a kill with it. It was so bad. And then they buffed it like towards the end of the year and it got like amazing. But he couldn't use a SOG. They switched him to a Maddox because basically I don't know why it took teams so long to realize it, but in that game, like you just needed to put your best players in the Maddox because it was by far the best gun. So like it took LG like 6 months to realize that, hey, Formal, he's kind of talented. Maybe we should throw him on the Maddox and put Skies on the main AR. And then they did that, and all of a sudden they were a top 4 team. Like it shouldn't have been rocket science, but apparently it was. And then they finally let Kenny run it, and guess what? He started frying because he's one of the most talented players. But like it was just crazy to hear how that's a maybe Octane's not on 100 Thieves, like that, the Slasher finessing to keep Kenny on the roster, like change the course of like the CDL really, because maybe they don't win that much. Octane doesn't become a legend. He doesn't join 100T. Like Kenny isn't their franchise player. Like it's crazy the way things could have changed if Slasher didn't finesse for that. But I think, is that all we got for Slasher on the flank? You got anything else you want to talk about, or do you want to move on to some of the other stuff?
Yeah, I think we can keep moving.
All right. The next thing we want to talk about, don't know like how much time we have to spend on this, but I feel like with the way the COD scene's been the last week, really since our last podcast, we have to mention it. Everybody is making their top 30 lists. A few weeks before this whole craze started, we made like our top 15 each list, which I feel like overall we were pretty in line with a lot of people, except for your blasphemous Parasite top 15 take.
I knew that was gonna get dragged up again.
Because I mean, we saw a lot of the list. People don't have him top 30, and obviously, I mean, Parasite is an all-time great. Nobody's going to debate that. But man, I can't believe you had him top 15 still. We could have gone. I wish we would have had that maybe more in this craze. Maybe it would have got brought up and really would have blown up on Twitter, and you would become a meme for putting him so high. I mean, he would have loved you though. You might have become his favorite podcaster. But everybody's been going crazy with these top 30 lists. There was the crazy Ben versus Hecz debate, and I mean, any of you that know me, Patty P, I met him at Champs in Black Ops 4 in a Whole Foods. Kind of was just walking through. I had my just like a standard Call of Duty League sweatshirt. I bought it the first day of the event. It was the night before they were playing units on main stage. He saw the sweatshirt, and I didn't even like approach him. Like he was shopping with Joe Fries, if any of you know him. He's an OG Halo guy. Used to create content for a lot of organizations. Was with EG at the time. Actually, no, he was with Envy with Hecz. And I was just walking through Whole Foods. I didn't want to bother Hecz. I saw him. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I wasn't going to ask him for a picture or anything because, I mean, the dude's shopping for his groceries. He doesn't want to be bothered. And he saw me with a sweatshirt on. He said, hey, you going to the event this weekend? And it was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, he stopped, took the time, actually, like, pulled me aside to try to talk to me. And I had a conversation with him for probably about 5-10 minutes. And he was probably one of the coolest pros I met that weekend. Was like a super nice guy, which, I mean, from the outside, you kind of think he's a toxic dude and he has a big personality. But, like, he was so nice to talk to. Like, kind of talked to him about the matches and stuff, got a little like insight into his philosophy for the weekend with them maybe not having the greatest team and stuff. I told him that they were going to smoke units the next day. I think they got 3-0'd off the stage, and Hecz got smoked, but still like one of the coolest guys I talked to. So just listening to him scream trajectory at Ben like a million times had me like dying, and him just laughing at Cellium over TP had me dying. But crazy debate that's been going on, Kyle, with his top 30 lists.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of the thing is like, you have these older guys like Nameless, and Hecz has been around for a while. So I think naturally they just want to see more respect on the older, like, quote unquote era. You have a lot of people like arguing for Big Timer being in there.
Yeah.
Because obviously he played back in like COD 4, won nationals, and then continued into like the MW3 era. I mean, just a bunch of like the OG, like for me it would have been like middle school into high school era that I didn't even know competitive COD was a thing. And you had guys like Big T and Nameless was definitely part of that era as well. Or he began in that era. And but I think their argument was like, where do these, like, how do you quantify like your Simp and Abezy, who have been so good recently, with guys that were so good back in that era? Like, you have, like, I think Hex's big argument was like, you have to put them on the same playing field. Like,
Yep.
they were beating the best in the world at that point. Simp and Abezy are beating the best in the world at this point. So how are they not on the same playing field? Like, how is Big T not on the list and Simp and Abezy are top 10? Like,
yeah,
I definitely appreciate that argument. And I think, a lot of the Ben J Nassim, and like on the flank, he was, his argument was like, the competition is so much better and the trajectory of their careers, like, and then you had every time he's like, trajectory.
Yeah, that was comedy.
You're gonna yell at me about trajectory, and that, yeah, just a lot of, it was just funny. It was comical, but I definitely think there was a legit argument there. I found myself, siding, like, taking both of their sides. I was like,
Yeah,
Ben
they
has
both
a
have
really
valid
good point.
arguments.
Yeah, yeah. So just what are your thoughts there?
I will say, I see why you want to put trajectory in because obviously projecting out, I think Simp and Abezy have a chance to be the 1 and 2 players of all time. I think Cellium will eventually be past TP. I personally side on the fact that he's not right now. I mean, TP has like 12 more championships, the same amount of rings, did it for a lot longer. I think Cellium will pass him. And I get both sides of the argument because Ben's saying his trajectory tells me that he's going to be better, which makes sense. That's logical. It's not a bad take, but I think you got to do it more based on right now. And I liked Ake's argument with that. And the other thing I kind of liked with the whole argument too that he brought up was, you say like that one era was like so much worse and everything, but you're no doubt top 5 players of all time. All were dominating back in that era. Like, I don't think anybody will argue right now that the top 5 players of all time in whatever order are Crim, Scump, Karma, Clay, and Formal. Formal was the latest one to the party. He came in Ghost from Halo, but he was dominating Halo before he came over in Ghost. And Halo, the scene back then was one of the most competitive esports scenes of all time. That scene in Halo before the Ghost days, and Halo 3 and all that was one of the most competitive scenes we've seen. So yes, it's the you're never gonna be able to close this argument. It's the age old debate in sports too, with like Jordan's era. Were they a lot worse than LeBron's era? And then back to Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, Magic Johnson, was their era worse? And it's that age old sports debate that you can never it's so fun to talk about, but everybody's always gonna be, it's like the old heads you hear talking about basketball, nobody could ever be better than Jordan. And some people are going to be like, nobody could ever be better than Akes from back in his day. It's just it's that age old debate you're never going to settle, but there's an argument for both sides. I agree. I don't know where to side, but I saw both their points. And I don't necessarily, I mean, I know the Ben's list was made off the criteria of Black Ops 2 and on, and I don't agree that should be the case. I get that's the way he made the list, but personally, I don't think that you should just do Black Ops 2 and on. I know when we did our list, we did that, but that was only because neither of us have a great knowledge of what before BO2 is. But if you're a pro player that played then and you have that knowledge, like a guy like Zuma who's more attached to the scene and knows it more, I believe you gotta at least somewhat include the games before Black Ops 2, because not having a guy like Merc in there is just blasphemous to me.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the whole we have to freeze time right now and just evaluate, you know, if Simp and Abezy were to step away from competing forever, where would they stack up? You know, as if they're not gonna get more wins. I think that's the argument that that Aches was making. He's like, you have to take where they're at now. You can't say oh, in 3 years they're gonna be number one and number two.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So I definitely think it was an interesting debate, and I think there's no clear cut right answer. But any kind of drama in the COD scene is always a welcome addition.
Yeah. All right, you ready to move on to our next thing? This one should actually be a short one. We said the last one was going to be, it wasn't, but this one should be a short one.
Yeah, let's go.
Akko retires from comp. Sad to see him go. One of my cousins that likes to watch competitive COD, it is no doubt his all-time favorite player, not close. So he was probably actually the saddest person. He's maybe the biggest Aqua stan. He was probably the saddest person. I texted him because he doesn't really check Twitter all that often. I texted him when it happened, and he was so sad. Obviously, we don't think Aqua is going to get a roster spot. Not necessarily maybe because he doesn't deserve it. He is a fantastic player, but he is just, honestly, his whole career, maybe for lack of connections in the scene, he just has been put in pretty just not great situations. I mean, his real coming out party was an AW with kind of a random squad of Nagafen and Remy and Facento. Really, the only guy known at the time was Facento. That kind of random squad of guys came together and took second at champs, losing to the Denial squad out of nowhere, and then he ends up getting another third place at the next champs in BO3, and kind of from there wins a couple events with Elevate and that Search and Destroy squad. He was the hard carry of that team in Respawn too, a great player. Then kind of coming out of those games, Black Ops 4, he gets a very good team. They get a couple thirds, couple seconds, I think, with Splice, kind of fall off towards the end of the year. And then since then, Modern Warfare in this past year hasn't been able to find a good roster, which killed his stock. Obviously, he plays the worst position to play when you're trying to be a fringe player because there's so many ARs and only 12 spots. He's a guy that maybe got killed by the league shrinking because he is one of those ARs that was always going to find a spot with the 16 to 20 teams there used to be. And he would always find a way to he'd always be their guy picked up as the 16th AR, but he'd find a way to make his team top 8 somehow. Just a great player. Career seems to be cut a little short, but he has crazy raw talent, I could see him being a guy that could tear it up in Warzone.
Yeah, I don't know what his trajectory. Here we go, trajectory. What his retirement trajectory is. Whether I'm not aware if he streams a lot or not.
I think he does play Warzone a pretty good amount in stream, but I'm
All
not
right,
sure.
all right, yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, there's always room for Warzone streamers, whether it's like competitive or just like the shoot the shit Warzone streamers. But yeah, I mean, obviously, we've seen COD pros go play Warzone, and they're obviously like they're like elite tier immediately, just because of their like gun skill, movement, and just overall ability to to play the game. And yeah, but just placed in you know sub ideal situations the last 2 years, and like you said, the league shrank. It didn't do him any good. And he's another player that's um finding the short end of the stick here. But yeah, obviously wish him all the best going forward, and just sad that we didn't get to see more of him. And maybe he wasn't the biggest personality. I don't think that helped him either, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's sad to see him go because he's another OG player and a very good one at that. That one is like apathy too. Franchising just really he had some bad situations in franchising, and that kind of seemed to kill his stock as well. Yeah, I agree. Echo it. Wish him nothing but the best. Hopefully, see him blow it up in content and kind of help push that back to the league because he seems to be a guy that still is very passionate about competitive COD. So hopefully, he can continue to blow up and kind of cycle that back to the league. As he said, I think he talked about how he'll still be watching and kind of paying attention and stuff. I don't know that it'll be the end for him. I feel like he might get offered a random challenger spot and grind, and maybe with expansion he might come back. Because if I was looking at expansion and he was a guy that came to me, I'd think about picking him up as an AR. So I don't know if he's done. I hope he's not done because I think he can still play. But if he is done, I hope to see nothing but success for him. And the next piece of news we had the Washington Demon Cats, team rumor name potentially for the Chicago NRG spot that could be switching. It seems the Washington rumor came out a little while ago. It seems to be pretty possible that the team could be in Washington. The Demon Cats name, who knows? Uh, but they also were rumored to be looking at Methods, Vivid, and Paul X among some other players. Thoughts, first of all, on the name, on the potential players, who they could pick up as a fourth if those three are confirmed.
First thing, I really like the name.
I actually do too.
Um,
It's weird, so I
the
kind of like it.
the historical aspect of like somebody like screenshotted a Wikipedia page where it's like the Demon Cats from like the 1800s, and it's rumored to haunt like the Capitol building and the White House or something like
Hmm.
that. And um yeah, just an really interesting little bit of like DC news. But okay, so we have rumored players of Methods, Vivid, Paul. So obviously they'd be looking for a second sub. Would it be crazy to see like a guy like TJ Halley
He's
go
Method's best
here?
friend, so personally I think that's the most likely fourth. If this three is confirmed, I think that's the most likely fourth.
Yeah, I mean, you could also see a guy like we would probably peg John to be one of the first subs picked
Hmm.
up if Vivid does get a starting role. I know we were all saying, Vivid would be the first guy to come off the board for teams making moves, but it seems like Vivid might be getting a starting role now. So obviously something that we hoped would happen. But yeah, I mean, I think my initial thought would be TJ Halley.
I think I would say TJ is the most likely. The other guy that comes to mind right away is the other most likely would be Temp. Temp, also another very good friend of Methods, and has played a sub a lot in the past. I could see him coming out of this team and being a sub with Vivid and putting Paul on the flex and putting Methods. I would say my top two candidates, and then a dark horse third candidate I think could be pretty likely is actually Saints. Methods was very high on him in challengers this year. He's a very good player, a vet, pretty reliable. I mean, Saints has been playing since COD 4 as well, and every year you put him in an event, you plug him in on a team, and he drops 1.1. Like he's a walking 1.1 to 1.2. You plug him in, he's a slayer. He just goes a little rogue sometimes. I know in the past he was known to be a little toxic, which is why maybe he doesn't get as many good roster spots, but he's a instant plug and play 1.1. The one time we ever saw LAG look a little decent was in Modern Warfare when Blast started to play the main AR and stuff. When Aches was benched, and Saints was a catalyst of that. He had like a 1.3 at the event where they finally started to look all right. And he's just kind of one of those catalyst guys that can just be your entry sub, play super aggressive, and get a ton of kills, open up the map. So, in my opinion, I think it'd be one of those three, unless they're looking to go with a more superstar play and maybe get like a challenger sub that we don't know about or something like that. But I'd say, yeah, I would, if this three is confirmed with Methods, Vivid, and Paul, I'd look to TJ, Saints, Temp, or John probably as their fourth, because I think Methods will want more of a vet to go with two young players like Vivid and Paul.
Yeah, I'm totally agree.
The one thing I will say about well, first of all, with the whole Demon Cats thing, people were kind of roasting it, but for me, like weird names are good. Like they said on the flank a little bit too, like subliners. All the players hated it, and then it grew on them. They apparently had a rumored name of the New York Pizza Rats was also a potential name. Which talk about another weird name, but you can make some cool logos out of it. I feel like, just like some overall just weird names and the team. I like the way the team is because obviously they can't have like some crazy insane team because all the players are pretty much signed, but I kind of like the way they go with it. If they end up going with whether they go with a challenger sub or a TJ or a Saints or a Temp or whatever, any of those guys, TJ, Saints, Temp, John, those are all fantastic players that can really help out a team. But I think Methods is a great first piece. When you've got the scraps left to choose from, Methods is a very good AR and can be a winning AR on a staple, maybe top 6 team. But he also brings a popularity to your team that you need. Being a new organization, maybe not having any fans. Bringing in a guy like Methods helps you to get instant fans. Then you've got a guy like Vivid, who also has a decent following now that he's been around for a little bit, but also has potential to be a superstar player at times. We've seen it. Can make your team very good at search. Paul, we think he might have superstar potential. So, like, I feel like it's a good balance. If these are your core three, you've got a guy who's super popular, can bring in fans, also a good player in methods, also not super old. He's only like 22, 23, I think. And then Vivid and Paul, potential superstar type players. I just like the way that they're going with known commodities, but also commodities that have a high potential to get better, as well as some popularity with them. I think it's a perfect storm and about as good as you can do for a team that's really coming into the game late with not a lot to choose from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do we expect this team to be a world beater? Obviously not. Could they hang out in that like? Could they like reach 5 to 10? They're not going to be the worst team, but they're not going to be the best team. I think. They're
Yeah.
definitely going to be competitive.
When I look
Yeah.
at them
So.
on paper too, if they get TJ, they're going to be a fantastic search team.
Mhm.
So, like, you never know. Those teams that are fantastic in search, speaking of the guy we just talked about, Aqua made a career off it. Teams were fantastic in search, and if they could steal a respawn, they were winning a lot of series. Like this team, if they get
Right.
Tej with Vivid and Tej as your subs in search, a guy like Paul who can get picks. Only thing is, I don't know if they have a sniper, but Methods also is kind of a statue AR, can really get some picks in search. Like this team has potential in search if it's Tej as the guy, and I don't know. I could see this team. I mean, I don't think this team's going to be top 3 or anything, but I could see them sneak in if it's another 8-team playoff. They could sneak an 8 seed, maybe pull off some upsets. Like this team has some potential for being a team of scraps. If this is the real roster, it's pretty good, I would say.
Yeah. Speaking of more rumored rosters, do you want to talk about the Toronto rumor?
Yeah, not a huge rumor by any means, but people have talked about this guy like he is like potentially one of the up and comers. Hexy, I personally don't know a ton about him. I know he's an EU Challengers player, and I know people that talk about him and have watched him say he's very good. And usually, when we have this many people saying somebody's very good, they actually are very good with guys like Hydra and Insight, and hopefully Pred coming up here. But Hixie potentially rumored to go there as a substitute. I'm not sure 100% what he plays. I thought he was a sub, so maybe this is an indication that if Bance doesn't play well, he could go in. If Kleenex is really unhappy to be on the team, like the rumors might have suggested earlier, he could go in. But Toronto kind of really leaning into their identity of being an EU team.
Yeah, I mean, we saw obviously we saw like Insight start off on the bench, and we kind of saw the writing on the wall for
Mm-hmm.
Methods being the first to drop there, with the EU squad being realized he was Kleenex's old buddy from BO4, I believe. And I don't know. I mean, I like what Toronto's building over there. I think that they're innocent until proven guilty with their squad moves and stuff. So I'd be interested to see him get in. Hopefully this Toronto team doesn't have any struggles because I really like what they're doing there. But more exposure for EU is always a good thing for the COD scene. So yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of EU, COD scene, next little thing we had to talk about was D-Real Drill. I'm not sure how to say his name really. I don't know too much about him either. He's apparently going to NYSL as like an assistant coach. I guess from what they talked about on the flank a little bit, I believe it was, he was like a helper for Hydra. I believe he's from the UK. And he was kind of a helper for Hydra as he was first coming into the scene and first in Challengers this year. Helped him. I don't know if he speaks French, if that was what he was helping him with kind of getting the communication down, or if he was just helping to teach him more COD. But it seems like a guy that Hydra is very comfortable with. So it makes sense for NYSL. I mean, from the outside perspective, a guy that is specifically comfortable with the player. Player is very comfortable with him. Young guy, you're trying to make him feel as comfortable as possible, especially because he's supposed to be your MVP. He's supposed to be the guy that carries you to the promised land if you're to win as an NYSL team. So, I mean, this seems to make a ton of sense. Just bring in a guy that can help coach. That's makes one of your players comfortable, and you want Hydra to be as comfortable as possible. So it seems like a pretty no-brainer move to me.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, always happy to see more coaches being added to, uh, these staffs and rosters and stuff. So, uh, happy to see that. And like we've said, Hydra, he's supposed to be uh, your number one player on the team, and probably doesn't cost them too much to bring in another coach, and it will take more pressure off of like just the main coach. So just happy to see it. Hopefully it helps Hydra acclimate more to the US, and you know will bolster their chances to perform well.
Yeah, 100%. Moving on to our last piece of news before we go to our little CDL format here is Atura and Nubsy as well. More coaches looking for jobs. Seems like Atura said he had something in line. It fell through, so he's still looking. Crazy that these two guys are still looking. I guess maybe not as crazy for Nubsy. I mean, I believe he's definitely a good coach. Deserves to be a head coach. At the very least, obviously deserves to be an assistant coach helping out somewhere for like search and destroy specialty and stuff. I think the last 2 years kind of really chalked his stock because he was obviously the coach of Seattle, who saw really, to say they saw a little bit of success is is kind of overstating it. They saw like absolutely no success. So obviously, at some point, even if you're not a bad coach, that's going to reflect on you somewhat if you have 2 just terrible years, which he did. And then Atura, I mean, he won a few events as a coach in Florida. They kind of underperformed this year, but I think nobody said that was his fault at all. They actually said he was something keeping them from really underperforming. Like, he's a great coach. So interesting to see that those guys are both still looking for jobs, because I think we would both agree that they both fully deserve to have a job, even if it's not a head coach, somewhere helping out a team, because they seem to be good at their job.
Right, and I think we've seen too that they're both pretty plugged into the challenger scene, or
And they're two of the more vocal coaches.
right. So I don't know. You would think that maybe one of these, like, I don't know, maybe one of them could find their way to be, uh, at least involved with this Demon Cats team, and maybe one finds their way to Paris or something like that. Or they find their way, as an assistant on one of these established rosters.
I can
Um,
tell you right now, if the Dallas, Chicago, or Dallas Optic team, they're sitting there with either Rambo or Sender, if they're only keeping one of them, I'm reaching out to Joey Nubsy or Atura and if saying, hey, I can't offer you a head coaching job. We've got Rambo or we've got Sender as our guy. Even if I mean, I would assume if I had to bet on it, they are keeping Rambo as the head coach, and then either Sender's leaving for a different head coaching job or staying on as kind of an assistant, co-coaching the team with him. If I'm that Optic team, I'm like, you know what? We've been just like not wanting to get these coaches all the time. It's kind of our fault. A lot of people say like, hey, one of you guys want to come join, help our staff out? Like, I'm offering the bag. Or if I'm one of these teams like Seattle, I mean, they're not going to bring back Nubsy because they let him go, but they only, I think, have the one coach in Phoenix. I may bring a Tura on to kind of go with him. Just something like any of these teams, you've got to reach out and at least inquire about it because these are two fantastic coaching candidates.
Hmm. Yeah, totally agree. And our constant pleas for the building out of coaching staffs hopefully will not fall on deaf ears.
Hopefully not. All right, you ready to move on to our little last segment here of our thoughts on the CDL format?
Yeah, for sure. So this is something that has kind of been a passion project, I guess you could say, of mine, where obviously year one of franchising, we had these home stands with 8 teams, and they were just ripped to shreds by the pros. Like, it's a Mickey Mouse
Hmm.
championship. You're not playing. You're essentially playing show matches like that are already predetermined. Uh, there was no rhyme or reason to who was playing who. Um, and obviously you only had 8 of the 12 teams there, and then obviously COVID moved stuff online, and then this year you had these pool play, like you had these like 2 groups and 5 pool play matches, and then that would determine your seeding for the major. And then there were 5 majors and then champs, and then all along you had these accruing COD points, um, that ultimately did end up eliminating 4 teams from even making it to champs. So our kind of exercise for ourselves was, how would we improve the CDL format, given the current status quo with 12 teams, with the goal of increasing overall competitiveness of the league, while also improving and simplifying the viewership. So obviously, we're trying to bring in new viewers to the league, and uh, but not make it too complicated. Like, okay, like we need a math formula to figure out, who won this match or something, or who's playing who. We want to avoid that. We want to make it as simple as possible. Um, and then also with the ability of this format to scale with eventual expansions, so like we don't have to scrap and rework it every season. Like we don't have to go back to home stands with 8 teams or something. Uh, we want to keep it, inclusive, um, and with the ability to expand. Um, and whether and then uh, are we going to add some online component, uh, or are we going to keep it with lands? And are we going to do lands in the franchise locations, or are we going to keep them in Texas and LA? Um, so I guess, do you want me to lead off on this with my thoughts, or did you have
um,
any?
I guess I'll let you go with like what your ideas for the format are first. But one thing that you mentioned, kind of how everybody hated that first year format, which I did as well. The one thing I do want to somehow, I haven't really like thought of a 100% great way to do it because it could get into a whole fairness debate of how you determine who gets it. But I like the idea of home series in a way, like traveling. Like I don't think every event should be in Texas or LA, kind of like it was this year at the esports arena and stuff. Like I like the idea of traveling to each team's city. Maybe you don't do all 12 in one year because that could get for a lot of events and stuff. Maybe you have like one central location for regular season and stuff. But I like the idea of kind of a traveling circus of going to each team's city to help build out that fan base. Like when I was at that Minnesota event, dude, people were going crazy for the Minnesota team that had no names on it, like no big names. So that's like something. I guess that's like my one takeaway. I'd love to find a way to work in those home series and go to each city and kind of have those show matches there.
Yeah. So I totally agree with everything you said. With like, we need to travel, and obviously, the more places we can hit up, the better. Um, so my initial thought is like the game launches in November. So I think asking for an event in December might be a little bit too greedy. So I'll push it back to January. So my initial thought is like we do a showcase opening LAN in January. It's not going to be like these show matches like we had last year where it's like the fan voted ones. It's going to be like we're jumping right into LAN. Um, there's COD points on the line, but the caveat is that we do we just play straight up league matches, and we start accruing COD points, and that will ultimately determine seeding for our first stage playoffs, which will happen sometime around April. And then I would
Hmm.
continue to keep some kind of online format just for the sole purpose of having weekly matches. And then, every second or third weekend we can pick up and go play a few matches at a LAN. Um, Whether you need to have all 12 teams travel to the LAN, I guess that would be a logistical thing. But I'd like to see some, like you said, like the traveling circus of the COD League. Um, but these players have lives, and it'd be kind of unrealistic to keep them on the road every single weekend. So maybe give them 2 to 3 weeks off in between lands, and then that all culminates at like the stage one playoffs. For me, that would kind of be an exclusive event where you do eliminate the bottom however many teams. We can eliminate the bottom four teams that don't have enough COD points.
Hmm.
But I would make it not be like every team plays 5 matches. I would have it be more like, at least 8 to 10 matches by the time we get to stage one. Um, and that would all be based on like logistics and how many matches we're playing on a given weekend. Um, and then the winner of stage one would get an automatic 1 seed into COD champs. And then
Okay.
we would wipe the slate clean and do it all again for stage two. And then that would end sometime around June, July. And then, so obviously COD points would reset. So teams like, the Seattles or the LAGs of the last 2 years wouldn't be like, down bad. We're just going to not try anymore. The year's chalked. Um, and then the winner of stage two would get an automatic 1 seed into the other side of the bracket uh, for champs. And then we would take all 12 teams to champs and then play a bracket like that. Similar to March Madness, you can give the 1 seeds buys through the first round with the ultimate, like, if the 1 seeds matriculate into the finals, then you would have them ultimately meeting. And then you would also have a double elimination, obviously a loser's bracket as well. So yeah, just I think with the goal of increasing competitiveness, it keeps all the teams bought in for the whole year.
Yep.
Because at least you can, reset the bar in stage two. Um, so if you happen to like only win a few matches in stage one, you're not totally like down bad. Like, Faze has 300 points and you only have 10 or something. Like, it's not necessarily going to set up like that. I don't think it's too hard for, Maven or Merc or Miles to be like, all right, the slate is wiped clean for
Yeah.
stage two. All the COD points reset, and let's say Toronto Ultra wins stage one. They have an automatic 1 seed bye into champs when that comes around. And that's the goal for winning your stages. And then I think that's easily able to expand with or you can scale that with expansion, so we don't have to like rewrite the league every season. um you know and I just think that would be my ideal thing. I'm open to suggestions, but if
Hmm.
they want to come and hire me to make their format, I'm totally open for it, because I just think that if you, especially if you're changing the format of the league every year, it just kind of becomes like, what are we really doing? Like, are we
It's hard for new people to get in.
exactly? So I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, and if you would have any like thoughts on what my suggestion was. But I know I was a little bit long-winded, but it's something that at least I'm pretty passionate about, and I hope that some of you guys out there at least have some kind of thoughts as well.
Yeah, I liked a lot of what you said. The only thing I think I'd like to change is I'm a person that's always been about a lot of events. I think I'd like to see more than like a stage 1, a stage 2, and then champs. Uh, I like I want to echo so much of what you said though, because I do think the idea of automatic bids is something that I've always been on board with. I think if there are however many events there are, I mean, obviously, unless you're considering that there's going to be like 12 events or like 10 events, I don't want like 10 automatic bids into champs or into playoffs or whatever you have. Like, or I don't want like six automatic bids so that there's only like 2 people fighting for one in case there are really like 2 fluke wins or something. Then you have like a 4th ranked team in points that just happen to get second at every event, doesn't make it in or something because of how things happen. But I like the automatic bid idea. I think I'd want to up it to like 4 events instead of 2 though, because I think that's one thing. Like, there's a consistent thing in a lot of the years that people complain about. Like, a lot of people say Black Ops 3. Me, I'm one of those people that say Black Ops 3 like best year for competitive. But man, I wish there was more events. There's only like 4 events that year, the whole year, like 4 tournaments, and then just a bunch of regular season. Uh, the other thing I'll say is I don't want any online aspect of the league at all. I know some people might think it's unrealistic, but we did it for 4 years in like I think at least 4 years in the Columbus studio. The players would go for little 2-week stints to the Columbus studio. They'd have like 2 separate pools. There was a group A and a group B, and I mean, at that time there was 8 in each group, which makes a huge difference, which is one of the reasons why we need that expansion. But they go for a little 2-week stints in Columbus. I think that's where you could do your little traveling circus. You could go for little like weekend stints every other week or every few weeks. You could have like a base where you'd play from all times. Like, I mean, I'm not going to determine a city for that. We'll say it's Texas, like Dallas or something, 'cause that's where a lot of people are near, where they consistently play their events. And then maybe you go and like every few weeks you travel to a different city to play a couple of those, and then you pick out like 4 cities each year where you have your event, and then cities can't repeat the next year until every city has gotten one. So like if Dallas and I don't know, LA and Florida and I don't know, another city, Toronto, host an event all in one year, then none of them can host an event the next year, and then it goes to 4 other teams. And I would like to see basically similar to what your format was, but with 4 teams. And then I don't know how possible this is or whatever you want to say. It might not be that possible. But I would like to see playoffs and champs be separate things. If that makes sense. I would like to see a world where only 8 teams continue to make playoffs, and you have 4 tournaments. 4 teams get automatic bids based on who wins the tournaments. If you have an Atlanta Faze situation where they win all 4 events, well, then they're the only team with an automatic bid, and it goes to the next 7 in the standings. Points wise, I haven't really thought it through. I guess it'd probably be pretty similar to like the CDL points from this year. And then I would like to see those 8 teams get seeded into like a playoff bracket where you're like the season champs, and then you go to a champs actual tournament at the end of the year. Maybe if that playoffs happen in July, champs, the world championships happens in August, and you've got all 12 teams there. The teams get put into pools of 4, and the top 8 from those pools make it out into a winner's bracket where they all start in round 1, and then the bottom 4 go into a loser's bracket. So they can't complain about being in a loser's bracket right away, because that's how the tournaments used to be. If you finished in the bottom of your pool, you were put in loser's bracket because you finished in the bottom of your pool. And then I would personally love to see a way that that all teams are forced to sign an academy roster, and then all those academy rosters compete. I know this isn't all that possible because we're in a franchise league, so they want to keep it so that it's only the franchise teams. But I'd love to see a situation where all teams had an academy team, and they all played in like their own little open bracket, all 12 of them. And then you come down and you see there's 12 teams in pools. You have the top 4 challengers teams. 1 gets inserted into each pool, maybe 2 go into 1 pool. I guess it's really awkward with 3 groups and 12. It's just an awkward number, but find a way that you can make it up to 16 and insert those teams into pools or somewhere into like the losers bracket of the tournament, and make it like a 16 team type of champs, because that's something that I'd be pretty interested to see. I mean, I want to see a bigger champs, but that's the one thing I don't know is all that possible because of the way the league is formatted with franchise, and you want to see your franchise teams in it. But that's kind of my base thoughts on it. If you have anything to say on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for more events. Obviously, it's always a good thing. I was, I guess, you know, I guess the real solution lies probably somewhere in the middle. To be honest, with
Yeah.
we just don't have like I'd love to see champs just be like a big bracket, like a March Madness style. Obviously, we don't have 64 teams, but like it's kind of hard to hype it up because every match just like seems to carry so much weight. Which is a good thing, but it also detracts from like just the sheer amount of matches we can witness on a daily basis. With obviously there just being one stream and uh every match is kind of like hyped up. It has a pregame, you know, they have to give their talking points I mean I do like the show aspect of it, but it also be nice to see like a bunch, like at least 2 or 3 streams going concurrently, and then like we got some like Bravo and Charlie, and just I just feel like there's so much room for expansion with stuff like that. But obviously as expansion comes, teams will be uh they'll be kind of hesitant. There'll be probably no feasible way to run like a Bravo Charlie stream because it's like who wants to be playing while Optic's playing on the alpha or something.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean I'm all for automatic bids like you said with you know four with maybe 4 stages instead of 2. I could definitely get behind that, but I just think the main point of this exercise was to just kind of like reimagine what we could do with the CDL, and like I don't know, I feel like there should be some uh reworking of how we do it. Um I don't think it's a broken system right now. I definitely think the 5 majors keeps people interested for the whole season. Um But then you get those situations where it's like we know that 4 teams are eliminated, and then like we have Tactical Rab announcing that Surge have been eliminated at stage 4 or something. It's like, well, shoot. Like I was if you're a Surge fan, you'd kind of like to see them at least have an outside shot. So that's where like the automatic bids and like the CDL points wiping at the end of a stage or something would be interesting. And then like with the automatic bids, it's like, well, Faze has their spot locked up. So just an interesting thought. I think it went well. Any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's such a tough conversation to have because there is so much you could do with it. There's probably so many aspects we're not thinking of. I guess like to come up with a couple like main things I want all LAN components. I think that's what we were
Agree.
basically promised with the CDL. I want everything LAN. I think logistically the CWL with a lot less money found a way to make it work. Uh, and I think we've got to find a way. I don't know what it is, but it's got to be all LAN. And I think there has to be automatic bids for major wins because even if like let's say like this past year, like how much did we complain over the last month and a half, 2 months that like we know the 8 teams that are making champs, like these tournaments really don't matter that much besides the fact that they're exciting to watch and people get their chips and it's on land, so it's fun to watch again. And like a Seattle run is fun to watch. But how much more fun would that Seattle run have been to watch at that final major if they would have went harder going into it and all of a sudden they make a run to top 6 and you're like, wait a minute, now the Seattle team just upset Faze. Like they can make a run if they win this, they're in champs or they're in playoffs, whatever you want to call it. Like those automatic bids have to be a thing because if you get into a situation where you're doing it based off CDL points again, and some teams start to get blown out where your bottom 4 are just terrible teams throughout the year and they're down by a lot of points like they were, well, you never know. This is still COD any given Sunday. Like teams can come out hot. And these bottom 4 teams, like with the way the league is, the bottom 4 teams are bound to have some talent on them. Like we're thinking that Florida might be one of the bottom teams. Well, they've got Big Wake and Skies in the team. Like those are players that can take over games and be talented and dominate games on the right day. Like if you've got a team like Florida, if they're in the bottom, but then all of a sudden the final major, if it's 4 majors or whatever, and they make that run and they get a win, it's like it's so much more exciting. It's still, even if there's not a lot to play for in that last tournament, there's still like that little hope that a team could make a run that's on the fringe and get their automatic bid. So I think my main takeaways are we need all LAN and we need automatic bids.
Yeah, totally agree. Like you said, the automatic bids would, it'd be really interesting to keep those for, or to implement those for teams that are struggling from a CDL point standpoint, because it seems like they really like their point system. So, uh, yeah, like if you keep an automatic bid, then these like losers bracket runs become more intriguing rather than just like, oh, like Surge is making a run, but they're mathematically eliminated. So I don't know.
Yeah, it keeps everything interesting and it keeps teams like trying. Like I feel like LAG just kind of chalked it, gave up Vivid, gave up and put in Mental, which they had like no reason to really put him in. Like it keeps teams from completely chalking it. Like I think you'd have to put in a component where like you have to have a certain like that's all they used to do in the CWL. Like if you were going to keep your like guaranteed league spot, you had to have like a certain percentage of your roster still remaining. I think that'd be a good way to do it too. Like, let's say the stage one major, like a team like Thieves, let's say they would have won the stage one major this year. Well, you have to keep at least 2 players from your roster that won it in order to keep your bid. Otherwise, you give your bid up to the next highest point standing team. Like, I think that'd be something to implement because, like, let's say Thieves wins the first major, their team just turns completely awful. They drop their entire team to pick up a new team, or they drop 3 players and pick up 3 new players. I think you should have to keep like a minimum of 2 of your players to keep your automatic bid, if that makes sense. Because like if the team that won the automatic bid is completely gone, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to just like say, hey, you still get it even though you don't have any of the same players.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'd like to see a situation where you only keep your automatic bid spot if you have minimum 2 players from the team that won that major. I guess you could make exceptions if there was some crazy circumstance, but like if as long as the players weren't like suspended or unable to play or something, then I think you should be able to, to only keep your spot if you have at least 50% of your roster remaining. But other than that, I think our other thing that we would come to a common ground on that we agree has to be in place is you have to have like a traveling circus type thing where you have to be going to multiple different franchise locations in order to build up the fan bases in those locations and kind of build those grassroots up. I think that has to be a must as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's what all the franchise spots were promised,
Yeah.
or at least that was like the big advertisement is like, hey, like you get to bring the CDL to Seattle, or you get to bring the CDL to Paris, or like we thank God we did get to see a London one. That one was ridiculous. That was actually the first event that I watched was CDL London.
Yeah, and the fans are crazy there. They're awesome.
Yeah, yeah, and that
I think
was coincidentally the one that that Optic won, and you had
yeah.
Scump screaming across the stage.
Yep. I think too though, the other thing um with that, like we said, and it all comes down to like everything comes down to the viewer. I think whatever they come up with, like you mentioned, it has to be simple enough and it can't constantly change. It has to be simple enough for the average viewer that gets into it to understand. Because if there's one thing across sports or anything that you watch, esports, sports, like anything that could even be unrelated to that, any entertainment thing, if you initially get into something that's completely new to you and it is so overly complicated that you feel like it's a task to learn it, you probably turn it off. Most people would turn it off and just not even be like, I don't want to learn this new thing. It's so complicated. There's too much. It's got to be a pretty simple format that, like, hey, there's regular season matches. If you win enough regular season matches, you get into this playoffs. And then if you win this playoffs, you're the champion. Like, it's got to be something that's simple enough for the average viewer to get into, because if there's all these complicated tournaments with this and this and this, and it's so complicated to get into, like, you might get overwhelmed when you first get in. Kind of like the thing I always use is I feel like search and destroy is like a good base game mode to get somebody. That's why I always say Rocket League is like the best esport ever to consume because it's so easy to understand for the average viewer. If you've never played a video game in your life, you're like, hey, this is just soccer with cars. Okay, I get it. But like that's why I say like search and destroy is a good base mode. Everybody has one life. There's one objective. Like if you just tune into your first match of Call of Duty because like your son watches it or something and you really want to like you want to watch with them, check what it's about, and you watch a hard point, you never played COD in your life, you're like, what is going on? Like this is chaos. So it's got to be something that you can allow people to get into the league and feel like they're eased in and not just thrown into a fire, I guess, if you agree with that.
Yeah, I'm like I said, that was one of the goals is to increase the simplicity of understanding the league. I feel like if you make it too complicated or it's just like inherently too complicated, you'll just you'll never retain people for more than a few minutes. Like
No.
once that first commercial break hits, they're probably gonna never watch it again.
Nope. It's honestly like a barrier that's prevented me from getting into a couple other esports. Like the Valorant world and how much people are passionate about it really interests me. But I mean, I don't really have a PC fully yet to play it on for a while. So it's like, I don't know a ton about the game. It's very hard to watch a game that's pretty complicated without ever having played it. Like, I'm sure after you play Valorant a little bit, it's not all that complicated to understand, like, at least at like a basic level. But like for me, I haven't played it. So it's like, there's the barrier of entry is there because it's like, I don't really fully understand the game. So I don't fully understand what I'm watching. Like, and that's going to be always a barrier with esports is people may not have access to it, might not know. So at the very least, you've got to make it easy for them to understand how teams are winning spots and how they're making the playoffs and stuff. And I think finding a way to make the league relatively simple while also keeping it exciting for the hardcore fan is something that they've got to find a way to balance. And I would assume they've got the people in place to help build that. Find Adam Apicella and get him involved. He built it with MLG. I think he can do it again. Um, but I think that was overall a pretty good discussion on that. I hope you're happy with it because this was your topic. You really were passionate about.
Yeah, I'm happy that we were able to cover it, and I feel like obviously we could probably sit here and talk about it for a while, but we're kind of beating it like in circles almost. With
Yeah.
I think we want to see the league improve, but or continue to improve, I should say. Because I think this year was a step in the right direction.
Agree.
But yeah, just overall happy with that. Move into our last little bit here.
Yeah, our little sports moment of the week. It can be a down bad. It could be something you liked. Personally, I liked the Colts win this week, and now I'm extremely down bad because I checked the score of the Titans game, and the Bills went for it on a 4th and 1 on the goal line. We're recording this during that Monday night game, and the Titans won, which I'm extremely sad about because I'm going to be attending the Titans Colts game in Indy in a couple weeks. And if the Titans lost this week to the Bills and then lost to the Chiefs, they'd probably be playing for the division lead come that game. So I'm a little sad that the Titans just won. That's my down bad sports moment of the week. Just happened live. The Titans won. I'm pissed.
Yep, mine would have to be my 0-6 Lions. For those of you that don't know, I'm a massive Michigan and Detroit sports homer. So Lions have been bad my entire life. Year one of a new coach, new GM. Haven't won a game. They've found new ways to lose.
It's impressive.
This year. At least this week wasn't too bad. I mean, you got beat by Joe Burrow pretty fair and square.
Yeah.
But uh, I have personally resolved to not angrily tweet about the Lions for 3 seasons. Can you
It's gonna
believe
be
that?
rough.
3 year. Yeah, I know my tongue's gonna be bleeding in a few weeks from holding back, but yeah. So just pretty down bad as a Detroit sports fan in whole, but hopefully things are looking up for a few of our teams. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I'm not gonna get too excited or too down.
Yeah.
But it's never fun when your football team stinks in the fall.
No, it's never.
Because it's by far and away the most popular sport in America. NFL is so. It's always bad to. It's never fun to have a bad NFL team. So I've been
No.
I've been not having fun for my entire life.
I've fortunately been pretty lucky because the Colts have been pretty good my whole life with Peyton and Luck, but a couple,
Mm-hmm.
so we're not both so down bad. A couple like sports moments for me, at least, that are positive this week is this is getting recorded on Monday night, but at the time of this, it's Bucks opening night. Most likely, this will probably get up on a Tuesday. Bucks ring ceremony, the banners getting raised, so that's something I'm hyped about for the NBA to come back because at least I know, unless there's some injuries that happen, at least I know my team's guaranteed to be at least a contender this year, which is something nice about the NBA. And then also, I'm looking at it right behind me right now. I actually I do a little bit of like sports collectible trading. This week, I made a big purchase. I bought a signed Andrew Luck Nike on-field jersey to add to my collection with my TY and my Darius jersey. I've got a Giannis canvas, got a bunch of signed gear, and I added my favorite athlete of all time. I added a signed Andrew Luck jersey to the collection. So that was probably the best sports moment of the week for me, honestly.
Well, congratulations. I'm very happy very happy for you.
And I'm excited to see the Bucks tomorrow. They play the Nets. I hope they just I hope they all walk up to James Harden with the ring and just shove it in his face. Because he seems to really think that for some reason that should be his ring. But if you've got nothing else to say, I'm ready to kick it out here.
Yeah, let's wrap.
All right. So obviously, this is a bit of a long episode, but we had a lot to talk about. I think we both got a little long-winded because we were just so excited to finally have some news to talk about that we weren't kind of forcing our way into some actual news that had some substance to it that we could actually talk about. But it was a pretty fun one overall. Got in a topic that we've kind of been brainstorming for a while, just waiting for the right time to actually discuss what we'd like the CDL to look like. I think it was a good episode overall, though. Obviously, if you guys are listening on all the audio platforms, kind of a new avenue for us, trying to build that up. So if you guys could drop a follow on there or support it however you can on whatever platform you're listening on, whether it's directly on Anchor or on Spotify or Stitcher or any of those audio listening platforms. And then obviously, if you're on YouTube, we're very close to hitting that 300 sub mark. Been stagnant for a little while in this kind of dry spell for the CDL, but close to the 300 sub mark. If you guys could drop a like and comment on this video, your thoughts on anything we talked about. There's a lot here. And then obviously subscribe as well if you enjoyed it. But that's going to do it for this one. That is all for this. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Hopefully, we got some more news soon to talk about. Otherwise, if you guys have any ideas for something you want to hear, if you maybe want to hear me and Kyle go fully in detail and drop our top 30 list so we can get absolutely flamed, let us know in the comments. Maybe that's something we'll do next week if it continues to be a little slow in the news department. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.